Hey everyone, and welcome back to the channel. So today I wanted to create a part 2 to micro adjustments and really controlling the fine movement when controlling recoil like you just saw. Because you know, every single video game has recoil that really kicks up and has movement, whether you're using the Volt, whether you're using the R99, or whether you're playing games like PlayerUnknown Battlegrounds, any game that has recoil. And realizing how small the movement is. What's different about this video here that I have in front of you is I implemented a camera. So I have a camera right above me to showcase on my hand just to show how small the movement that I'm making. I know it can be really hard to see as well. And there's going to be a lot of things that we're going to talk through in this video. Specifically, we're going to discuss how small the movement adjustments are. We're going to talk about how you can work on this, solutions, downsides of those solutions. But I feel like this is a topic that's not really highly discussed. And it's been a YouTube video that I personally have always looked for online that I had never even found. And the reason why I'm discussing this video is I've always worked on heavily flicks. You know, you kind of flick between various targets. If you're using, let's say, a sniper or let's say a wingman, or any gun really, where it just really looks flashy and you're like slicing between targets very, very quickly. Which can be a good thing, you know, you got a nice flick. But I really think of this, and I'll use it as an example in my hands, where we've all worked out, right? And I've been specifically working out a lot more recently to really be able to talk about this topic a lot more, is where you see people where they bench press and they're lifting a heavy object. So if I'm lifting a heavy object and you do it real fast, well, that's fine and all, but the problem is that if you're lifting a heavy object, is that you're not refining the small movements in between. You ever seen like a lifter where they really just kind of push really heavy and everything? I know that you can't physically see me. I'm over here showcasing as if you were watching me. But then you realize that you're not working on the fine movements, how moving slow can really get some of that movement in. So an example, when we flick between two targets, you're like, oh my God, he's so fast, he's flicking. But in reality, you need to have a nice smooth motion back and forth, almost like when you're tracking this and you realize, oh wait, I'm super stuttery. Why does my aim feel so stuttery? And almost once you really work on this, it starts to look and feel more like an aimbot, especially when you're tracking individual targets. So let's talk about really how you work on this. Well, I mean, the first thing you can do is really get used to the recoil in game. And then, I mean, with recoil, you have to realize just how much that you have to pull down. So I'm going to give an example. I'm going to mess up my sensitivity here. I use a very specific sensitivity that I put in the config file. But the first thing that individual players always try to do is they try to solve for it by either raising their sensitivity or slowing it. So in this case, I'm going to raise my sensitivity as if it was too fast, and now have a really fast sensitivity. And for this exercise, just so you're aware, my normal sensitivity that I've really started to get comfortable with is 15.15 inches per 360. I believe at 1.5, I'll add all the digits on screen, at 1800 dpi. So this is a very fast sensitivity now because this is at 2 at 1800. This is definitely manageable to control, and you'll realize like almost my hand didn't even move when controlling that recoil, but you'll see the recoil. I'm not using a barrel stabilizer on this case just to showcase it, where I'm barely moving my hand to control that recoil. Now the downside to this is you put I'm not used to the sensitivity really at all, where you put a higher magnification and you can still see, and the sensitivity does scale. Remember in most video games that your sensitivity does scale, and you can change these if you like to a specific sensitivity, which I have for the 3x and above, to match differently. Otherwise it scales and becomes slower and slower and slower. So my sensitivity for my hip fire, notice how it's slower on a 1x. Now, if I go to 2x, it's even slower. I could match this with my hip fire, and I did at one point, especially since I was just doing a lot of aim training. But you'll find whenever you're flicking and moving that you'll start to lose some of that fine movement. And whenever you're in a really intense situation, you kind of like almost stutter, or you lack the refined movement. Right? So most people, when they run into the situation, will start to say, okay, well, this sensitivity is too fast. I can flick and I can look around to various targets and I can have this, you know, nice insane movement. Like, where is he? Oh, he's over here. Or, oh, I need to flick to this. But you see the issue that I run into immediately is I lack stability on trying to hit the target. So in games like CSGO, and Apex is in such a unique spot that you'll want to slow down your sensitivity. So let's say in this scenario, I'm going to slow down my sensitivity to like 0.02, something along those. Let's do 0.2. Notice how my sensitivity is way slower, and look at the stability and movement that I have in my hand. where that issue that we were having before around the 15.15 inches per 360 is now essentially gone. I now have that nice refined movement if somebody's here, and I can kind of adjust with the flick and a faster movement of my arm and hand, which is really nice, right? But the downside of this is that you kind of lose that flashiness and the amount of times you need to lift up your mouse to make a full 360. So when you see pros play CSGO and a lot of those games, they usually run a very low sensitivity. And the reason why is that most targets are going to be right in front of you. So if you're cutting an angle, let's say if I was cutting this angle and I was looking for this target and then I found them and I can just kind of flick. I'm not used to the sensitivity, but you kind of get the idea of like cutting an angle and cutting a corner. And I'll show an example here because AimLab has a really great example of like entry, where you kind of peek and cut corners to hit targets. But the downside of this is you immediately see is that I do not have a full range of motion. So you need to find the sweet spot. So let's discuss those quick pros and cons. So as you lower your sensitivity to really control that recoil, because notice how I'm pulling way further down in this sensitivity, because it's a lot slower, giving you that fine movement, right? But the downside is you lose mobility to be able to catch targets or do anything else, which can be really hard as well. So you need to find the sweet spot between running either a too high sensitivity and then getting and snapping to that target, right? And going back and forth, because then it's too much and then you lack precision, but you garner speed. So if you imagine yourself as if this was a giant graph and you saw speed versus precision and you try to get enough precision to the point where you were fast enough, just find the sweet spot. I'll showcase a graph. It's not the best graph. I'll just kind of do it in Paint really quick, where you find the focal point where you as an individual player find your sweet spot. And my sweet spot happens to be, I believe it was 0.6 here, but I know it's like 0.59. Again, I posted up on the screen at the start, but this isn't bad for the example that I'm giving and where I start to feel a lot more comfortable, because at least I can do a full 360 movement, I can have movement around, and then I can flick, and then I have fine control. So now the question when we discuss all this is, how do you work on this? What do you do? Well, the reality is, and I'll switch to some footage from AimLab here just as an example, is that you will find that you have to utilize an aim trainer or just hop in game and get used to being in that scenario very much consistently. And it takes a lot of time getting that refined movement because it's not easy. My issue, and I'll kind of zoom in on it right here, is that I tend to overflick or I get a little bit too fast. Usually my solution as I get better and better aim is I find that I improve with a lower sensitivity. But when I have a lower sensitivity, and this could be because of my years of playing Battlefield and using a low sense sniping, is that when I do that, I really struggle with being able to, just do a nice clean 180. And Apex Legends is such an interesting game, especially if you're new to Apex. Even those that are seasoned as well, is that you require fast 360, 180 movement to bounce between walls and targets. Because sometimes in a battle royale, enemies come from everywhere, but then you require precision immediately with like a wingman and controlling the recoil. Because as you saw from the start of the video, and I'll showcase it again right here, that recoil control really, and you saw my hand barely moves, right? And then when you really nail it, and then as you go further away from a distant, you're going to find how much you barely need to move and how much you need to adjust with your hand. It's very micro adjustments, very micro movements within the hand that you have to get used to. It's almost like if you were a doctor or a surgeon. Let's talk about one of the issues that usually occurs right away, and that usually is eating habits. Right now, this is a great example. You probably can't see it on camera, but I haven't eaten yet. So I figured, well, I have food on the left of me, I just haven't eaten. But in this example, I want to show my hands there. They get a little shaky whenever I haven't eaten. And if my hands are shaky, you can imagine with precision and accuracy that if they're even a little bit shaky, what that can do, unless I lower my sensitivity and get really comfortable with it, right? Another solution outside of aim training, and I have a few things in front of me. Keep in mind that I'm not a doctor, but I have I've taken a lot of passion into this, right? Where you can utilize hand grips. I used to do these at work and I tested it for a really long time. Notice how I've developed a lot more grip strength over the years. I remember at first I could barely do these. I know that I have a bunch of them weighted from 5. I don't know what this one is. This is medium, where they have heavy tension, lighter tension. These are for weights to lock in your weights, but I've seen some that are like this. Notice that this is for like fingers. This is really just for, you could almost utilize anything to really improve grip strength, which is why I'm showcasing this one, because what I use this is for my weights to kind of lock them into like a dumbbell bar. But still, holding something like this and these fingers right here is not a bad exercise. Remember that a lot of the stuff that you're working on, to be very, very careful with what you're doing with your hands, because your hands have they're more tendons than anything, and when you're moving around you have to be very, very careful with them, because tendons take a lot more time to grow. And I've learned this from experience, just trying to improve my aim and improve my hand muscles, that it can take 1 or 2 months. So as you're improving your aim, it can take a lot of time if you're not used to it. A lower sensitivity again can solve some things, but it's not going to fix everything, especially when you're trying to get nice clean 180 movement like you're seeing here versus having to throw your arm around, which is another exercise that I plan on doing a longer video on. But when we talk about working out, from my experience already, I've been working out consistently for about almost a month now. So what I have found is that as I work out and I develop more forearm and muscle strength, is that I'm definitely more comfortable and faster at a lower sensitivity. So the downside though from working out, because I've been doing lifting and rowing specifically, is that after I work out, I notice that my hands definitely feel a lot more tension, especially from rowing consistently. So that has definitely caused some jitteriness in my hands, and that can get refined out from, I'm assuming, from gripping, you know, these little things and practicing. But the thing is that you don't want to overstress those muscles, because they're the first things that kind of go in your hand. So you got to be very careful, and I can attest to that whenever I push it too hard early on. And I also have a little stress ball here. A little stress ball that I have here is that, you know, you can move it within your hands, massage your hands whenever you're playing. It's very important to practice really good hand health. You know, roll it around, get the blood flowing. And especially if it's cold, you have to be even more careful if it's cold, because you're more likely to kind of stress out or hurt your hand. So if you really have cold hands, I'm going to go grab this real quick. During the wintertime, I'll have a little hand warmer here. And this has been really helpful, so I don't hurt my hand. So whenever I play for 5, 6, I've even played 7 hours on end, you know, you can warm this up. And even in the morning, even if it's hot where you're at and you need to get your hands warmed up, this is a really great thing to have that'll really help you out in terms of, you know, warming up those hand muscles early in the morning. And these things all take time, like diet, everything is kind of a work in progress. I'd say this is probably, I wish somebody made this video for me a long time ago, which is why I'm making this video now for somebody out there. And I hope that it's really helpful to really talk about. And the reason why is that I wish somebody was there to tell me about this, because otherwise I would not have worked on my flicks as much. I would have worked more on the precision and micro movement and hand control in my hand. You can solve this. I know I did a video on this on various grip styles as well. You know, you can palm the mouse, which is definitely going to lean towards a lower sensitivity and get you comfort. You can claw, or you put in the back of your palm of your hand, or you can fingertip grip. I use fingertip grip, which is one of the best for speed, but one of the hardest when it comes to maintaining precision. But it all comes with time. I hope some of you guys found this video really helpful. Again, like I mentioned before, I really wish somebody made this video. I'm going to follow up and talk about how much working out has improved my aim, but I figured this was kind of a nice little segue to really talk about, and a part 2 from the first one, because the first one I didn't even have a hand camera. So now I have a hand camera and I can really explain a lot of this stuff. And what I did in between is I kind of peppered some footage when I did micro tracking. It was VCT on AimLab specifically, where I kind of track back and forth between targets, and you can kind of see my hand and see how small those movements are. It really was almost like the movement of like a thumb or, you know, a finger made the biggest difference from landing the shot. So as we wrap up here, I want you to see where if I'm controlling recoil, it's almost like you're working to try to keep the camera stable. So if I'm pulling down and you see how the camera like moves left and right just slightly, you'll kind of see with the recoil control, and you just keep the center of your FOV as clean as possible. And I guess while I'm on that note, let's talk about FOV, where if you were to drop it or raise it very much high or low on each spectrum, when you lower your FOV, it makes the movements, and remember to match this to what you kind of see in your brain. This looks like the movement is a lot more than what it is, which can be good if you run a lower sensitivity versus if you're running a higher sensitivity. The recoil didn't magically go away. The only thing you're doing, just like in the camera that I have up here, if I change the FOV of this camera, it'll be instantly tighter on the image that you're seeing. So again, covered a lot. I'll do my best to timestamp everything. I really kind of talked about this with no script, but with just kind of talking points, but I figured it would really help somebody out there. Thank you again so much for watching, for being a subscriber on the channel. I know I try to do a little bit more beyond Apex to really help you out in terms of improving and share experiences. And the reason why I do it is because I just wish that somebody had this for me whenever I was growing and learning, and I feel like it's a topic that even pro players really struggle with, even to current date, because there's not an exact science, but I would like to compile as much data to really put something together. Yeah, again, thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to leave a like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you guys all in the next one.